America's middle class is no longer the richest in the world. And get this, the same study that says this says that the middle class is shrinking because the U.S. needs more liberal policies like a higher minimum wage, more unions, and more government spending on education. But some here say those are the policies that are actually pulling down the middle class. So who's right? Hi, I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Rich Karlgaard, Elizabeth McDonald, Rick Unger, Sabrina Schaefer, and John Tamny. Well, John, first of all, let's look at what the study's conclusion is, which is other countries are growing their middle class, like Canada, for example, but not the U.S. Why?
Well, the reason the U.S. is not growing is because government has grown too large. It's become too intrusive in our lives. Americans aren't suddenly lazy. They haven't run out of ideas and initiatives. They suffer government barriers to economic growth by definition. And so if you want to reverse this, if you want to restore the middle class, there are basic things to do. I think abolishing the capital gains tax, which penalizes investment in new jobs and companies, would be a good idea. I'd also love to see the dollar stabilize, but this is simple to reverse.
Well, Rick, what gets me is, and by the way, the middle class has been shrinking more since the end of this study, so it's been going in the wrong direction for a long time. But the Obama administration spends 6 years pulling the country to the left, Rick, and then blames the right for the middle class shrinking. I don't get it.
Well, look, I'm going to try a different approach to this because one thing we can all agree on, we do have this problem with income inequality. We've had it, as you just said, David, for a very long time, which is why I wonder if we should be approaching this as left and right. You can go back to the 70s. That's when this really started to kick in. And you know what? We've had conservative administrations, we've had liberal administrations, and no matter what kind of administration we have, we're not fixing this problem. Let's look at some different explanations. For instance, the ability to send jobs overseas in the modern era. How much is that impacting on this? The fact that we have so many public companies today that have an obligation to shareholders over workers, and the fact that because we have open foreign markets, maybe we don't care so much about how much
Steve,
money.
a lot of those factors are also affecting countries like Canada. Canada is affected by all those factors Rick just mentioned, and that's growing the. We should note, by the way, since 2006, Canada's been run by the Conservatives. Canada's moving to the right. They're growing their middle class. We're moving to the left. Our middle class is shrinking.
David, the middle class is under pressure everywhere around the world when you read that article closely, including Germany, which is the largest economy in Western Europe. Canada and Sweden were two countries cited in that article. Canada's been cutting taxes. Their corporate tax rate on the federal level is down to 15% versus 35% in the U.S. And Sweden's been cutting taxes in recent years. So the solution is obvious. And when you look at those other countries in terms of minimum wage and things like that, Germany has no minimum wage. Their youthful unemployment is 8%. France has a big minimum wage. Their youth unemployment is 24%.
And EMAC, we don't even have to go internationally. We have an experiment here in the United States because each state tries a different pattern. We see Illinois and California raising taxes. We see Wisconsin and Texas lowering regulations and taxes. It's the latter two that are doing better than the former two.
Yeah, that's right. The example I think you're citing is Texas. I mean, a lot of the net new jobs have been created in Texas.
Let's spell it out. One third of all new jobs created over the past 10 years have been created in one state, Texas, and they've been dramatically lowering regulations and taxes.
Plus, the legislature in this state meets every other year. I think that's a great idea for Congress.
That's true.
You know, the thing is, with also add to the list that Steve rightfully put forth, not just Canada, Sweden, also add Estonia and New Zealand. I mean, Calvin Coolidge did it. He cut taxes in half. He cut government spending in half. And the economy, boom, grew 7% a year under Calvin Coolidge. Tell me which tax hike creates a middle-class job. I don't see it. And, David, the interesting statistic.
Easy for you to say.
Exactly. I'm almost speechless by this. You have rarely seen median household income decline during recovery, as has happened under this president. Goldman Sachs just now cutting first quarter growth.
Well, the interesting thing, median household income in 2012, by the way, according to the latest census, Rich, it was about $51,000. Now, guess how much money you get if you're in Hawaii on welfare? You get so much money, you'd have to make $61,000 in salary, which is more than the median income, to equal the amount of money you get on welfare if you happen to live in the state of Hawaii. Something is askew here.
Yeah, well, when you have a size of government, as we do, as John Tamny pointed out, that is about 23% of GDP, it should be about 18% of GDP. Study after study proves the economy grows best when it's smaller, at about that range. But we're subsidizing all kinds of things. I don't want to beat up just on welfare recipients. Why are we subsidizing housing? Canada does not subsidize housing with mortgage interest deduction. Right. It has a higher rate of housing ownership than the United States without those subsidies.
Yeah,
we should let young people opt out of Social Security. We should let young people opt out of Social Security and save for their future.
That's a great point. But, Sabrina, I just want to there's nothing wrong with using the word welfare. I think even I would include corporate welfare. I would include the welfare, for example. We just expanded the welfare program with regard to health care enormously in this country. Everybody that is empowered by the government, whether they're on a corporate level or an individual level, has expanded. The rich people are getting richer. The government empowered are getting bigger. The middle class is getting squeezed. That's how I see it.
No, I think you're right, David. And one of the problems is we have Democrats and progressives who look back to the sort of golden era of the mid-century, post-war, where you had strong unions and these manufacturing jobs that just don't exist in the numbers that they do today. But now we live in an information age, right? We have to change our tactics. And one of the big things that is left out of the conversation and what made that mid-century middle class so strong was the strong civic society. Everything wasn't solved by more legislation or more policy. Pelosi and others, they should go back. They should read Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. They should remember how important it was to have a strong community. So much of what we look to government to do today, from child care to education, was taken care of by our communities, and that's something that is really
John Tamny, there's another point in terms of getting back to growing the middle class. Wherever we take the individual away from responsibility for his own self and his own family, whether it's in education, unions, minimum wage, whatever, health care, whatever it happens to be, that's when we get in trouble. When we try to supplant the individual responsibility for government responsibility, right?
Absolutely, because we have to remember individuals comprise the economy. The economy isn't some blob, and so when you increase incentive for individuals to thrive, they will do so. A good example, I think, is China. I was just there thanks to Forbes. 30 years ago, the Chinese were starving. Today, they are becoming millionaires and billionaires by the day. What's the difference? Not the water they're drinking. The difference is government got out of the way, freed them up to grow economically. If you free up individuals, you reverse these problems.
So, Rick, if the communist Chinese can do it, why can't we?
Look, I got to take a little bit of exception to some of the things that I've heard. Let's take Texas. It's great that they're growing jobs. It really is. Good for them, good for the governor. But what they're really doing is moving people from poor towards middle class. That's great. I love it. But it doesn't speak to income inequality amongst the middle class if they aren't paying those people enough money, and they aren't. Also, Steve.
How do you know they're not?
Wait. Steve, you said it's obvious.
Do you know that?
Guys, let me finish, please. Steve, you said it's obvious that all we have to do is lower taxes. The reality is raising taxes hasn't addressed this problem. I'll give you that. But we have had tax cuts over these 50 years, and that hasn't.
All right, but hold on. There's Steve Forbes. There is better than any poll is what people do with their feet. They vote with their feet very often, and they're not moving out of Texas. They're moving into Texas. They're moving out of the places that are raising their taxes, like California, like New York.
Businesses are.
And David, things that hurts people is an unstable weak dollar. 1970s, we trashed gold, made the dollar weak, and that's when the inequality gap started to grow. And in terms of taxes, not just the federal income tax, you got a huge payroll tax, huge state sales taxes now. So the tax burden, that's why it takes two incomes in a family to have a middle class existence, whereas in previous generations it was one income.
Why is it now radical to cut the government, cut taxes? We have a government blob. We have a government bubble going on. Bring the $2 trillion in cash parked overseas. That's the cheapest stimulus parked by companies overseas.
That's got to be the last word. Thanks, gang. We got to move on. Coming up next, in the doghouse, a government watchdog caught altering his investigations at the request of senior administration officials. Is this proof the administration's trying to bypass the checks and balances on big government?
As whistleblowers came forward, we found out that this Inspector General, Charles Edwards, had very close relationships with senior officials in the Department